We just released our very first indie game, Forge Industry, a resource management and automation game. If you're interested, you can go down below in the description. There's a link to the Steam page.
Please help a brother out.
Please help us out indeed. And we've been working on it for, I think, about 18 months in total, together with 2 other developers. And, well, I think, Thomas, you can say that a lot of things went wrong during the development.
We have been big dum-dums.
This was our first game that we ever made. So in this video, I wanted to sit down together with Thomas, who was our main programmer guy, and I did basically everything else. And we're gonna go over some of the, 23 mistakes is I think the number we landed on. 23 mistakes we've made during development of our game. So hopefully you can learn a few of these and not do them yourselves, because some of these have cost us literally months of development time and a lot of frustration. So the first one is probably one of the biggest ones, and this is a mistake that you can't avoid really, and that is going in blind, because there is a point where you'll have to start and you don't really know how game development works. Because in our case, we're 4 people, but only Thomas here had some idea of how do games really work, how do I make games. And he just sold us basically, oh, it's gonna be great. We just make a game easy like that. We had no Unity experience, we had no modeling experience, we had no Unity specific programming experience. We just knew C# basically from our previous degree. And you'll see a lot of the mistakes we made down the line in this video all stem from not having made a game before.
And one of the first mistakes we made was we had way too big of a scope. I think we once mentioned, if you have a scope, divide it in 2, look at it, divide it in 2, and maybe then you can finish it in 2 years. You cannot have a scope that is too small. So make sure your scope is not too big, especially if this is your first project.
Yeah, I think we have some scope changes, but for example, at some point we wanted to have railroads in our game.
No, you wanted that.
Well, I wanted railroads in our game. And then at another point, we had this idea of hiring consultants to come work for you and teach you new stuff and things like that.
Yeah, so that's basically mistake number 3. Too many scope changes.
Yeah, that's indeed mistake number 3. Is once you have your scope, we used to have this GDD I wrote 18 months ago, and we've shifted a lot from there. Now, of course, this is normal, whether it's through playtesting or just through finding out that something sucks or it's not feasible. You will be changing things about your scope, but ideally you want to have as little of those as possible, because sometimes you may spend months working on something and then be like, well, this is kind of dumb. Let's just get rid of it all and start over. So spend some time with your scope. And also, I think we didn't research how feasible our game was really. We just were like, this is our scope. And we didn't do any proof of concepts really for certain mechanics. We were just like, this is our scope, let's go for it.
Yeah, I think it was half a year before we ever got our first feedback.
Yeah.
So not good, do it faster. Another mistake we made is in the beginning we didn't have enough commitment. And this is something the entire team suffered from basically. And you get started, you're hyped for a week, second week is a bit less, and then it's downhill from there. So do make sure you reserve enough of your free time, so to say, to work on your game, because you need constant progress.
Yeah, of course. The problem we had there was we all had main jobs on it. We were just making a game as a fun side project. We weren't, when we started 18 months ago, this wasn't this is going to be our career. No, it slowly evolved. But because we didn't have that mindset of this is gonna be our future career or whatever, and we were just doing it for fun, we never had the commitment, and sometimes there were people on the team who didn't really do anything for 2 weeks, and then it also brings the rest of the team down when nobody really does anything. Now that has changed, of course. Once we started getting more and more up to speed, we have gotten more commitment, and even me and as well as one other developer have gone full time here at Bite Me Games by now. And there has been a huge difference, I feel, since we went full time in how much we went to do. So this is something that you as an indie developer will probably also be working on, because not everyone has a huge nest egg to just be like, I'm gonna quit my job and just make games and hope for the best. And part of that commitment issue was also our next mistake. We are colleagues, so to say. We're all just friends.
You're my employee.
I'm his employee, that's what he says. But in reality, we're all friends because we knew each other from before we started game development, because we went to the same university. And the problem with that is that you don't want to ruin your friendship even when things aren't going as great in game dev. For example, there was a period of time where William, one of our developers, he was really busy at work, at his main job, and he didn't really do anything for, I feel like, a month. I don't know, William, if I am exaggerating.
He doesn't watch our videos anyway.
But it was really hard for me or anyone else of the team to be like, yo, William, you have to work more because, well, we're also just friends and I don't want to risk ruining my friendship by telling him what to do.
Another mistake we made is we didn't playtest nearly enough, especially at the beginning. There was a time period where we would implement mechanics, and then after like 2 months, Marnix would be like, hey, I tested this mechanic for once and it's completely broken. Yeah, not good.
Yeah, I think this was mainly also because we had the devlogs. Once a month, I went through everything we added that month and started actually playtesting it because I needed footage. And I remember vividly, like every time that I was recording a devlog, we have like this Discord channel with like bug reports. I would just send like 20 different bugs, like this doesn't work, guys, did you even test what you wrote? And I think we still have playtesting issues, not just with public playtests, but even internally. If you look at, for example, you, Thomas.
Wait, what did I do?
How much have you actually played Forge Industry? The answer is not enough. That's what I can tell you.
I won't go on record saying I hate this game, but...
But yeah, there's the problem. If you don't playtest the game enough, you need that feedback, because for I think the first like 9 months, I wasn't even certain until we went to Gameforce to demo, is what we're doing, is anyone actually gonna find this fun? Because especially if you have a game that's like somewhat broken and like in development, it's really hard to see the potential of it.
Another thing we should have done is code reviews. We, especially from the beginning, like Marnix mentioned, Jamie and William didn't have any experience and they committed basically without a code review, meaning their code is still in the game as we speak. And at the beginning, these lines of code were just not good. Just like when I commit things, sometimes everyone makes mistakes and a second opinion is very valuable. So when you make a project where you are not alone, try to make code reviews work.
This is actually a bonus one that I just thought about, a bonus mistake, and that is don't do drunk commits. You're someone who was very guilty of that, where it's like, you know, you just, we use Git. If you don't know how Git works, there's this system of branching, and what you're supposed to do is, oh, I'm gonna work on roads, for example. You create a separate branch, and then once you're done, you would get that branch reviewed, and then once someone else is like, this is good work, you can merge this into master. What we had Thomas do is like, sometimes I see a commit straight to master that is like workers go brrr or whatever. And those things, well, they're not really useful in figuring out what actually changed, for example.
I guess you're right.
Another problem we had was that we had too many distractions. We set out as a studio to make a game, but we did so much more. This was something that especially I had to deal with a lot, is I was like, we need to have this YouTube channel. But I don't know if you've been following it since like day one. Well, thanks first of all. But you remember that we used to make blog posts about our devlogs in every video. We used to make TikToks for a certain while as well. And all of those things take a lot of time, especially now. I'm getting better at making these videos, so I can make one in about 4 hours start to finish. That's still a lot of time that you could spend making models, developing, reaching out to other people for marketing, playtesting your game. And I think we definitely overcommitted in that regard. Like, for example, the blogs and TikToks, we just were like, get rid of it. So ideally, only work on your game. And I do think that devlogs can also be a good like extra bonus, but don't do like we did with like 2 uploads every week if you don't really know what you're doing.
Another thing we did wrong is we didn't really look for funding from the beginning. So up until this day, we are completely self-funded. And for Forge Industry, this was possible because we were still working as like our main jobs. However, if you want to make a living out of this, you should probably look for funding pretty early on. This is also what we are planning to do for our next game, and you can find more about that soon.
And then, you know, because we didn't have any funds, that also meant we didn't have proper talents for certain aspects. So the main ones here are 3D modeling. As you may have seen, our game doesn't really look the best because we're 4 programmers in the end. And I just got the head of Marnix. Now you get to make all the 3D models. I had never made it before this game, any models. So I just had to learn suddenly on the fly whilst also managing all of those other things. And another aspect where having some funding would have helped us is getting something like music. Right now, our music is also just generic music, and it still works because it's like, you know, we're a generic fantasy game, but especially for maybe our next game, you want to have funding so you can actually get a proper composer, or if you know a proper composer, that works as well, but we don't know anyone who has any musical talents really, so that was something that we also missed out.
Talking about talent, that brings us to our next point, which is number 11?
I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's 11. So if you're keeping count, good job. And that is, we didn't really think enough about our course structure because we made it in 2 days. This is also because we didn't know what we're doing from the start. We basically started with a quote-unquote game jam where we would make a MVP in like 2 days. Yeah, this was not a good idea. This is something I regret to this day. One of the probably the biggest mistake even, because you just make code that is not very scalable. Because of that, brings us to the next point, which is we had to rewrite a lot of code. And that brings with it a lot of time waste.
And we didn't have to rewrite just once. I feel like there were certain things we have even rewritten like 4 or 5 times.
Jamie rewrote the item system like 7 times, I think, or so.
Yeah.
If not more.
But on the other hand, there are things where we should have rewritten them.
Yeah.
Because there are still parts of the item system that we didn't rewrite, that we're now like only realizing like 5 days before launch, as we record this, that we have a big problem, and that leads to a lot of like extra manual work. Like it works, the current implementation, but we never tested it, so it's not as efficient, and it's a lot of just monkey work basically.
Yeah, that's the scalable part I mentioned. Just try to think ahead of what you have to do in the future. Future you will thank you.
And speaking of thinking about the future, also don't just say, oh, we'll fix this in the future, because that's another problem we had. We just ignored certain issues. So for example, our item system was one of those things. We only really started implementing our items like 3 weeks before launch. We had like, I think like 20 test items, but we have, I think in our final game, it's about 700 different items and like variants. We had to manually make all of them because we didn't test on time, is this actually a good implementation that we wrote? And especially for us, it hurts a lot because items are literally the core of our game, and it feels like we didn't like really think enough about it, or didn't on time be like, yo, this is a problem, we need to fix it.
Another problem is we overpromised probably from the beginning.
Yeah.
Because we were at Gameforce and we were like, release in March, I think we said.
February even, I think.
Oh boy. Well, anyway, yeah, this was way too optimistic. So yeah, do make sure you keep your scope in mind, but also give yourself some leeway.
Of course, this is also going back to our first point. We had no idea what we were doing. We came in blind. For our next game, we now know to double, triple, whatever our estimate is, we're gonna make it a lot larger than...
Yeah. And not waste time on railways, Marnix.
My railways, we're gonna... Everyone wants railways, I feel. Comment down below if you want us to make a post-release update with railways.
Please don't comment that. Comment Marnix, it was a stupid idea.
Speaking of stupid ideas, using assets that we just ended up nuking. I think you know a bit more about those.
Yeah. We started and we were like, oh, I used Rewired in the past, which is still a great asset, don't get me wrong. But we didn't really need it because, well, Unity's new input system is pretty good. And in the end, we switched over to it anyway. So we had like a lot of overlap because we first implemented Rewired throughout all our game. And I was like, well, now we're going to rewrite it once again for the Unity input system. So yeah, think about what assets you really need, because in the end, you make a game yourself and you should only rely on assets that take something away from you that is pretty technical and not core to the experience. And also think about the free alternatives, because Unity actually provides a lot of good things already.
Now, we said that we didn't ask for feedback on time, or we haven't been looking for feedback, but then the other problem was we took some feedback too close to heart, really. When we were demoing our game at Gameforce, I think like 10 people came up to us, played the game, were like, oh, this looks great, but I would buy it only if it has multiplayer. And it was like, you know, co-op. And there were 10 people in the end, and we were like, okay, 10 people just said they need multiplayer, scrap everything we've made so far, we're gonna add multiplayer to our game. Even though, once again, our core wasn't written to support multiplayer. So first of all, it was a lot of shit on your end to get all of that working. It always just worked like mediocre at best. And then in the end, we were just like, yeah, no, we're not adding multiplayer for release. We had to scrap it all. And that was something that dragged on for literally months and was just like making our game unnecessarily complex.
Yeah, it's just also a lot of wasted time because in the end I implemented a very proof of concept version. We didn't, well, completely implement it, but we also added things like an in-game chat and stuff like that, which is...
Hey, that's what you did. You can complain about my railways. I never asked for a chat system.
I mean, I made it anyway. But it's still better. No, well, it's not better. It's both are horrible. Don't do it.
Speaking of horrible ideas.
Yeah, speaking of horrible ideas, we didn't respect localization enough. I think from the start, Marnix was like, we're going to make this game in 13 languages?
Yeah, it might have. This was once again, you know, going in blind. It's like, what should we do for a good game? Oh, I know, be as accessible as possible. And we were like, oh, let's support our game in Arabic. I literally know nobody who even plays games in Arabic or like Russian or things like that. Yet we were still like, oh, let's just add all of them. It'll be easy to just like localize it. Yeah. It was not.
Yeah, we started way too late. We had way too many languages. And another mistake we made is we didn't translate everything by default. Like lazy me was often like, I'll implement this feature and Marnix can add the localizations for me. Yeah, don't do that, not a good idea. Think about what languages you really need, and if you don't want to deal with it, just pick English.
Yeah, I think the languages we stuck to in the end are just the ones that either we knew ourselves or we knew someone close to us who wouldn't like mind like chipping in and helping us with the translations. So I think we ended up with 6 languages in total.
Which is still quite a lot for
Which is still quite a lot for an indie game indeed. But that was just, you know, the collective of, oh, we know multiple languages.
Another thing where we were probably a bit too lazy is at the start we made a lot of things, well, mechanics, UI, things like that, but we didn't bring them to high enough quality from the start. We were always like, it works in its base form, we don't need to make the UI pretty already. That's problems for future us. Yeah, this made it so we went to Gameforce and we were like 2 weeks ahead of it, we were like, well, it kind of works, but everything looks absolutely poo-poo. So yeah, now we have to remake every UI element in the game so it's actually presentable. This is something you should probably also do way earlier, and this is something we will do in our next game, and that's like, we make something, we bring it to our quality standards, or at least of a high enough quality standard that we are not afraid to show it to the public.
Yeah, I think what you do see is that, you know, I've actually seen a lot of games, but they're always early access games where like for a long time they do just use the Unity default buttons. I think Unturned, for example, still pretty much uses the default Unity buttons. But that was also a game, you know, if it's in early access, it's like one of the things you can excuse, but we're not doing early access. So now it's like a few days before release and we are like reworking all of our prefab still to get it up to spec to how we want our game to look. And then one of those problems was, because we didn't really have a visual good looking game, is our marketing got so hard, and once again we also like ignored it and we just simply didn't try our best to do marketing. So what was our idea for marketing? It was just this YouTube channel, and that was really all the marketing we did.
Well, events a bit.
Events a bit, but we only did like one event in the end really, where we advertised our game, because the problem was there, once again, we didn't have enough funding to like go to like actual marketing campaigns or to pay influencers or whatever. We did reach out like 2 weeks ago for Steam Next Fest, and we have some people who played our game there. But in general, yeah, we didn't really do much marketing. We had like, we commissioned one piece of concept art as like our promo art, and that's it. That's all we did really. And even things like our Steam page, you normally want to have your Steam page up and pretty as fast as possible, whereas we've only reached the like final pretty stage of our Steam page like 2 weeks ago from like recording this video.
And if you want to see how we go from marketing zero to marketing hero, do make sure you subscribe, because we will be making a video about how we will tackle it in our next game.
Yeah, and also just like a bit more in depth into all the marketing mistakes specifically that we made. This one ties a bit to playtesting, but that is that we didn't have enough iterative development. This is honestly a bit of a shame on us, because we come from a software engineering degree where practices like Agile and Scrum are like rammed into you for 3 years straight. Yet we didn't really apply any of them. And what that means is that, for example, the problem like how we ignored items, or also simply things like balancing, are actually a horrible mess for us to deal with, because we didn't really balance anything up until, again, 1 month really before the game came out. And then you have the problem of, well, you only have 1 month to playtest it, whereas if you balance very early on, and then you playtest and you balance again. That's that iterative loop that you want, whereas now we simply don't have the time to do that loop often.
Yeah, and that brings us to the next point, and we already briefly mentioned it, is we had too tight of a deadline, because basically our deadline was good to have feature parity of what we wanted, but to make it work we also needed to do a battle of scale, because we were ready with the features, but there were no items. There were, it wasn't balanced. No, yeah.
All the like requests, for example, like our in-game like.
Yeah, in the harbor. So the deadline was too tight. We still have to do a battle of scale. That meant we didn't sleep a whole lot the last weeks.
Now, there's the deadline issue, and then one other issue we had is that we didn't finish our game on time. And what do I mean? Isn't that the same? There's this concept that a lot of games have where they go golden, which means that, you know, we're not adding any more features. We maybe just fix some bugs and like pretty up a UI, but you don't implement anything really anymore. Whereas now, we had planned that, but our plans suck. Everyone has a plan till they get punched in the face, in which case item system punched us in the face.
Multiple times, which caused us to now only like 1 week before release, finally finishing all the localizations for 6 languages, and I think we have like 2,800 keys, so that was a lot of pain to get all of that so last minute. So ideally you wanna just be like, okay, now no more new features, whatever we have in the game right now, that's it. And maybe the rest we do post-launch and updates or whatever. Now we just focus on finishing the bugs, making sure that their game plays smooth, and just like some quality of life changes. And these were really all the mistakes we could think about. Now, that doesn't mean, if I look at Tom, we made a lot more mistakes. I'm very certain of that. Very certain.
This was a rocky start to our game dev journey, I feel. But I am glad that we made all of these mistakes, and now we know that's 24 mistakes less really that we'll be making in our next game. Hopefully.
Yeah, we were forged in the fires of Mount Doom. We are indestructible now.
Let's see about that, but I'm curious about you guys. Leave a comment down below maybe. What are some of the mistakes that you've personally made on your game? Or maybe some like little tips that you have on how to avoid certain mistakes. I really love to interact with you guys. And yeah, as I said before, if you want to see how our game ended up despite all of these mistakes, link down below, you can go and get the Steam page.
And if you want to see how we do for our next game, make sure you subscribe, because we will be covering it as well. And in, I don't want to say a deadline yet, but once it's finished, be sure to...
We haven't even defined the scope and you're already giving us a deadline. This is another mistake. Don't do this. Don't listen to...
We will add that one in the video in like 1.5 or 2 years.
Let's see. But yeah, apart from that, you can stay tuned to get more information about our next game, and also just these kinds of game dev videos where we talk about the behind the scenes, so to say, of creating your own video game. So if that's something you're interested in, go ahead and subscribe down below, and also maybe leave us a like, as it's a win-win for both of us, because we get our number going up in the amount of subscribers, and you get this cool content 2 times a week. That's all I really had to say. I don't know, you don't have anything to add, or?
I want to sleep.
You want to sleep. Well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.